All right. Great. Thank you all for joining this Sunday evening. Good evening to all of you. This is one of the many what we call as travel talks or familiarization calls that we organize with Rustic Travel. Ideally, we try to do it every fortnight on a Sunday, especially in the evening. Hopefully, everyone is well rested and open to such enlightening talks by speakers like Ranjit. And we have been doing quite a bit in the past couple of months or so, and there are more, as we go ahead. So, stay tuned and keep in touch. If you're not part of our uh, WhatsApp community, you can always join that. I will share the links on the chat where you can, actually fill in the form to listen to some or attend some few calls in the coming months or weeks. All right. So without much ado, I will start. So I know Ranjit for around 17, 18 years now. We used to work together in the past, and that professional bond turned into a personal bond. And I would say, when he started traveling with us, even before that. And I would say he's a regular traveler with Rustic Travel. And we have often named his number one Rustic Traveler with him traveling with us so many times. This year
Hmm.
already he's traveling some 2, 3 times already. He's going to Annapurna base camp in couple of weeks from now. About Ranjit. So Ranjit
അതേതോ
hasn't been writing,
അതേതോ
forever. Could you please put yourself on mute? Thank you. So he used to be a corporate executive, a data analytics consulting professional, mainly in the area of data sciences. Uh,
Can everyone see the
he
screen? Should I share
Yeah.
it now for Hemant?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's
All
it's
right.
okay. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
I mean, let me do that here. He's an engineering graduate and alumnus of IIM Lucknow. And after a long innings in the corporate sector, he um, just quit that. After how many years? Around 20 odd years, he quit, and he focused on writing. So he has written around 8 books, actually 8 books, one non-fiction included, and a lot of other fiction books. Uh, he has written around 5 collections of short stories, 2 novels, one non-fiction book on investing. So he loves investing, and he has a lot of knowledge about investing as well. So that's another passion of his. As I said, he's an avid traveler. He is Rustic Traveler number one. I mean, every year, so to say. And in fact, when we did, Rajesh is my partner at Rustic Travel, we did All India road trip where we, during the pandemic, went around all the 28 states in a car. He was very much part of that. And, quite a bit of the inspiration for many of his stories came from that trip. So, so I will not talk much now. I will let Ranjit do all the talking. So, Ranjit, over to you.
Thanks, Hemant. Thanks for your kind words and introduction. And everyone can see the screen. As Hemant has provided some background, I've been writing for the past 5 years now. And though travel writing is not the only thing that I have written, as he said, there's a non-fiction book, and many of you who are on the call today have been following my writing for a long time, so I'll not get into that. But for today's agenda, we'll basically focus on travel-inspired stories. Uh, the basic, idea today is, 2 or 3 points. One is to introduce everyone, because I have been venturing down the path of travel-inspired writing probably over the past 2 or 3 years. Hemant mentioned the road trip, and I've been traveling more in the last 3, 4 years. I was also a traveler during my corporate innings, but it's increased now that there's more time available. So travel always inspired some writing, and now it's taken the form of fiction for me. So we'll focus around that topic, primarily introducing you to the various types of travel writing, some examples, so that it's very clear, what are the different types of travel writing that are there in this overall field. Uh, some tips and points to remember, things basically that I have learned, things that I keep in mind primarily when I go about doing my writing. It could be useful for those of you who either want to venture down the path of travel writing, or maybe even the next time you read some book around travel, then you'll probably remember some of those points. Uh, and then we'll go into some examples of travel-inspired fiction, and maybe something from my couple of examples from my own writing on how certain stories were inspired by some of the places that I went to and the people I met. So we'll jump into the topic right away. Hemant spoke about most of these, so I'm not going to get into this. Uh, Many of you also who are familiar with me and my writing know most of this, so we'll just jump through this right now and get into the different types of travel writing. So there are typically three categories that I have observed of travel writing, and we'll talk about number two first. Most people understand this very easily. This is the commercial travel writing. This is the writing that we use when we want to go somewhere. Let's say you want to plan a travel to three places, and you'll basically look for guides for destination places. What is it that you should see there? Where should you spend how much time? How should your itinerary look like? Places to eat, uh, people to meet, maybe, or even experiences to include in your itinerary. So that's the most common, and the biggest amount of content in this space is to commercial travel writing. We'll go through some examples, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because everyone is familiar with this, and there's a lot of blogs and a lot of guides that all of us use when it comes to commercial travel writing. The first one, which is the travel narratives, is a very interesting area of travel writing, and it is largely non-fiction. This is typically what authors typically start. Journalists is what I've seen write most of the books or memoirs or travelogues in this particular area. Most of the travelogues, interesting travelogues, fall in this particular section because these are things that actually happen, but it's not a narrative like, I went here on day one, then I went here on day two, these are the photographs. Not that kind of thing. It's essentially something that will make the experience real for you as the reader. So, what is it that really appealed, and what was it that actually happened, and kind of weave that into a story somewhere. So it's also a story, but it's a story where the people are real, the motivations are real, the happenings are more or less real. I mean, it's a commitment that most writers make when they write nonfiction travel, that what they write is actually what happened. They can't really falsify things there. So that's the first category. And the third category, which is basically the travel fiction, is stories or novels that are set around the theme of travel. So the travel might have happened here, but everything else is untrue. The characters may have been inspired by someone the author met, but what you write about the character is completely the imagination of the author. The story is completely made up. So that's the third category, travel fiction, and we'll delve into both of these categories. In fact, all the three first, and then the other two in more detail as we talk through the next few minutes. Here are some examples about travel-inspired books. As I said, the commercial one we are more or less all aware of, and in the sense that we know the Lonely Planet, the Rick Steves series, I don't know whether any of you have read the Thousand Places to See Before You Die book. It's essentially about the destination. It's you go to Agra for the Taj Mahal, then you go to Rajasthan, take a camel ride, those kind of things. Uh, the non-fiction piece, I have included three very prominent examples that I have personally read. Uh, they really make the experience alive for the reader. So, A Walk in the Woods, the most famous, as far as I am concerned, Bill Bryson book, where he actually talks about the experience that he had in the Appalachian Trail. Uh, if, if many of you don't know, it's the longest hiking trail in the world. I think it's around 3,000 kilometers or something across, I think 12 or something states in the United States. And he actually took that trip with a friend for around 6 to 7 months without knowing what it entails. Uh, so this is a great book about, if you really want to experience that walk in the woods, which is not just a walk, actually, it turns out it's something much more complex than that. So that's the kind of, it actually happened, all of it. He says it's happened, it's turned into a movie also, and similarly into Thin Air. That's the other book that I've mentioned here. If any of you are trekking or mountaineering enthusiasts, as many of Rustic's customers are, this is kind of a book which you'll not forget, about the Everest disaster of 1997, I think. Hemant, correct me if I'm wrong.
96.
96, okay. Uh, and John Crocker, who's actually a journalist, uh, went on that trip. He's also a mountaineer. And things went terribly wrong in that. Right from when they reached base camp to eventually only a few of them came back, not all of them came back. So that's a very gripping experience that he has put down into this book. And then this third book, which I read actually recently, around 2 years back, and I had told Rajesh and Jayashree about it when they went on a All India train trip, I think 2, 3 years back. It was about a British woman, a British Indian woman who came to India just to experience India, and she actually went in a train, 980 trains across India, across in a period of around, I think, 4 to 6 months. And it's a real experience that she has described in a very witty, humorous way. People that she has met, experience she has had as a British Indian. So it's an excellent non-fiction book as well. What you see in the bottom here is the actual travel fiction. Now, these are not really stories. These are not really things that actually happened. For example, they are inspired. But what happened, like Eat, Pray, Love, is actually inspired by the author's trip, I think, where after I think after going through a divorce, she wants to go to India, Italy, and Indonesia, Bali. And many of you might have seen the movie as well. But what actually happened is very different from what's in the book. There's nothing like that. It's basically the journey of the character, how she changes, what she learns, and things like that. Alchemist, all of us are familiar with. It's about this boy who dreams uh, of a treasure, I think in Egypt, and goes through Africa in search of that, and then how he himself changes. And it's probably the best book in the of Coelho that I've read, and many of you might have. And then again, Hemingway wrote this book about his trip, inspired by his trip to Kilimanjaro. He didn't climb Kilimanjaro, but basically, uh, the snows of Kilimanjaro is about a man and a woman at the base of Kilimanjaro who know that there's a leopard and a carcass of a leopard on Kilimanjaro, and it starts from there. But it's actually about the two of them, about the man specifically, and what the character goes through that. So clearly, the non-fiction piece is about the experience, and the fiction piece is about the character. So those are the two clear differentiations between travel inspired. So when you go about writing, I think you first need to decide what is it that your story is going to look like. Is it a travelogue? Is it a memoir? Is it a description of where you went? Uh, or is it how somebody you met, how they changed, and what were the things that you learned through that journey? So based on that, I think there are certain tips and certain examples, certain very clear things that a writer must follow when they want to write either fiction or non-fiction. As I said, we'll not talk about the commercial piece anymore. I think we'll get into the uh, fiction and non-fiction tips. So this is a slightly wordy slide. So not to worry, I'll just go through most of them in a bit more detail here. What I've seen is that in non-fiction, a key decision for a writer is to decide whether to write in first person or in third person. And non-fiction works really well when it is written in first person. It really makes you, because the person who's actually gone through that experience, it's his experience, he's kind of omnipresent throughout the narrative. The first person narration is most effective in that. Whereas in fiction, uh, there will be scenes where the third person, where the main narrator or the main character may not be present. So the third person narration actually works best for fiction. So even though non-fiction is real in the sense that it actually happened, to make it into a story, whether it's a travelogue or a memoir or even a column, uh, it has to have some kind of anecdotal experience or inspiration that connects with the reader. It can't be just that, it was the summer of 1996 and I went on a trip to wherever. It has got to, like Crocker said, that, his actually idea was to go only to the Everest base camp. And it was a mix of the two leaders of those two trips, two groups to Everest, which actually inspired him to actually join them and take that actual summit. Similarly, the walk in the wood starts with the curiosity of the writer, the curiosity of the author. He was just curious, what's this trail? And that was the inspiration. So he starts with anecdotes with a friend who later turns out to be a drunkard and faces and the problems he faces in that trail. So there has to be some inspiration that nonfiction starts with, whereas fiction starts with the character. So the character in Eat, Pray, Love, for example, is depressed. There is significant conflict in her mind, and the character in Hemingway's Snows of Kilimanjaro is a twisted man. And The Alchemist is a spiritual guy. I mean, I'm good on spiritual. It's a philosophical story. So there has to be some definition of that character, because that's what the reader will identify the most with in fiction. And that's how, the start of any fiction's travel story goes. Non-fiction consists of a lot of vivid descriptions. It need not be chronological, that day one I did this, day two I did this, day three, and then, kind of 6 months, a trip is explained over, six chapters. Doesn't need to be like that. It need not be chronological, but there has to be a flow and a vivid description. The description has got to be something that gives you the experience, not just uh, not just a real uh, putting into words what you saw. Whereas in the fiction, the destination goes into the background. Uh, it really is not important. Snows of Kilimanjaro might as well have been snows of Mount Everest, for example. Alchemist could have been a trip not just through Africa to Egypt, but it would have been some other place. Of course, the destination is important, but it's the background, it's the setting. The journey of the character is what's more important. In nonfiction, it's important to remember, as you see here, don't write what's already in the guidebooks. Everyone knows that Taj Mahal has to be seen in Agra. Everyone knows, what's there in Egypt. Everyone knows even though everyone may not know what's there in the Appalachian Trail or Mount Everest, they can always find it out. You obviously have to focus on the facts. You can't misstate something, but you have to check the facts, sorry. But no point in writing what's in the guidebooks. An important skill for writing fiction is to use words which show, don't tell. And this is a very classic, basic skill of a writer. An example here that I have given is that I walked on the trail is actually what happens. But the words to use there could be something like the dry brown leaves crunched under my feet, which basically gives the reader a feeling, okay, what actually happened. You can imagine it vividly, rather than the first one, which is, you're basically telling him what happened. Use the senses is also a very important part of writing fiction. The view was stunning, is fine, but then something like he wouldn't take his eyes off the view, or his hand shivered when he saw that, or his hair stood on end. those kind of things. Use the senses. That's very critical in writing fiction specifically. And in non-fiction, it's not important. I mean, because it's not really critical. But then you still need to avoid those cliches. Bali is full of sun-kissed beaches, or there's lush greenery in the wherever, or the landscape was breathtaking. These are cliches, which really, even though you're writing an informal piece of non-fiction, need to avoid that. Humor. Humor is a slightly it's a slightly risky thing when you write nonfiction. Nobody's expecting humor in nonfiction, but unless you're Bryson, be very careful about humor. I mean, you need to pull it off in a way that it connects with the reader. It's a bit dangerous. So I don't read on that path unless you're very sure that there's certain things, like if you've gone to a comic show somewhere and then okay, you can roll that into your nonfiction column. But in general, making fun of things that you actually experienced is not a good idea in nonfiction. Of course, you can do whatever you want in fiction, but be a bit careful about humor in nonfiction. Again, as I said, the last line is about the reader experiencing the journey. That's what nonfiction is all about. Even if you don't climb Mount Everest, if you read Into Thin Air, you will actually feel as if you've experienced what mountaineers go through, and especially if things go terribly wrong. Uh, it really, those 80 trains book, the entire train experience in India, you will actually feel as if it's obviously not as great. I don't want to make a judgment. It's not as great as Into Thin Air, but the experience of the journey still comes through. Whereas in Alchemist, you don't bother about, did you see the pyramids in Egypt, or, did the man in Hemingway's Kilimanjaro finally find the leopard on Kilimanjaro or not? It's basically what happens to the character. And that is what will leave the reader with, at the end of that particular famous story of Hemingway, where you'll actually get into a shock and you'll keep wondering what actually happened. So that's the character's journey within the actual travel journey. So that's where I think this is a good place to kind of pause. If there are any questions, and then before I get into some examples of my own experience about travel fiction. Any questions, anything that you would like me to?
Hey, hi Ranjit. Yeah, this is
Hi.
Thanks a lot for your insights, and your books are really good. So actually, my first question is regarding the blogs and travelogues. So basically, there has to be some time limit on the travelogues and blogs, because what the travelogue or the blog was produced 5 years back, the same things will not be applicable now. So,
Right.
I mean, what we should take care of about these kind of blogs and travelogues, because there is a
How long?
timeline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So got what your question is. You're right. Absolutely. That typically in commercial writing, that applies much more. If you're writing a blog primarily for explaining what to do at a particular place, it'll probably get outdated after 5 years, as you said. Uh, for most commercial writing is updated every 3 to 5 years. That should be the time limit. I don't think there's any point in going beyond that, and Hemant might be able to answer that much better as well. But for non-fiction, if you're writing a memory or something about your own experience, it generally is relatively timeless. Like the Walk in the Woods happened many years back. It was something that Bryson, I think, experienced, I think, what, 25 years back or 20 years back. And similarly, the Mount Everest tragedy, Into Thin Air, is almost a timeless classic of piece of nonfiction. The reason for that is he doesn't get into how the base camp looks like, how the journey from Kathmandu to the base camp is, what he did on the way, those kind of things he doesn't get into the non-fiction piece. He talks about the experience, the camaraderie, the entire people that he met, though actually that's all real. That's the reason it becomes timeless. So to that extent, if you use the right skills for writing non-fiction, you can make it relatively timeless.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'll just add to that, especially on the Into Thin Air book. I've read it some 8, 9 times. And the
Mhm.
characterization is very good, right? So you come back remembering each and every character. So how they came, and they're different people. The two group leaders were different. So I think what you spoke about characters, I think that was also sort of there.
Yeah. Right. Thanks, Adit. Thanks, Rahul. Any more
Yeah,
questions?
yeah, Nandit, just a follow-up question. Actually, this is regarding the religious travelogues or blogs. So, given the certain conditions today prevailing in our country, I mean, people do have, I mean, any kind of humor being done on any religious symbolism or anything. So, regarding that, what care should be taken while writing any blogs or travelogues regarding to the religious places?
I would say if you're writing a memoir, then as much like humor, if your intention is to give the experience, then I think religious tourism or religious, if the background for your story is a religious kind of a place, then should probably focus again on the settings and the character more than the specifics, which are likely to uh, not go down well with your audience. That would be what. But I'm not really experienced in that. I haven't written those kind of books. Uh, so I think you'll have to use your judgment when you go about writing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ranjit.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Thank
Ranjit,
you.
Rajesh here, one question. So when we say travelogues, these are, about, say, a destination, a place. Like, so I'll tell you my problem and my example as well. So when we went to the Taj Mahal, me and Hemant, so Taj Mahal, I mean, the story was beautiful, but it is, pretty beaten up. Beaten up in the sense that most of it we know, right? We've read it or we've heard about it. But what I found interesting was the way the guide, his name is Saif, he told us that जब ताजमहल बना था तो सोने का दाम इतना था और इतना उस पे लगा. So what I thought was, gold is a beautiful thread which I can pick it and kind of build the story there. So do we do these kind of detours when you think as an author?
Not in the fiction piece, definitely not. When I'm writing a story, then the detours are, I don't know, a similar example is, I think what you gave on Taj Mahal. You yourself, I think you have read the story that I had written called Guide, which was in
Yeah,
Dew
yeah,
Fort.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah.
it deals with a lot of history that the guide is very proud of, right? But
Exactly.
the issue or the story is not about the history, as you
Correct,
realize at the end.
correct.
It doesn't matter. I mean, obviously, I've tried to make sure that the facts are right, what the Portuguese did and what actually happened 500 years back, and then how the Indian army took over Diu after independence and things like that. Similar to what you said about gold in Taj Mahal. But the story is about the person who suffered, right, because of the fort getting closed, Diu fort getting closed. So I typically like to write stories where the focus is on the character and the destination is the setting, and not get into the historical facts of that particular location. And I think if you are a writer of either non-fiction or fiction, then that is the more prudent path. Of course, if you are writing a guide for travelers who want to take it up, then obviously you need to get into the details, and some detours that you spoke about will be interesting to read. But your main goal is then to tell the writer tell the traveler what to do when he goes to Taj Mahal, or what to do when he goes to Diu Fort, for example. Yeah. Does
Yeah,
it
yeah, got
clarify?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and thanks. Yeah, I mean the character, the way you defined it, and how that story weaved in. I mean, I can remember each of that. I actually can give a figure in my mind on that character, right? I mean, yeah. So that's exactly what I was looking for. Yeah, that's an apt example. Thanks.
Okay. So let's move to the uh, next slide and then keep the rest of the questions to the end. Can you see this slide? Travel-inspired fiction examples.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so just 3 examples from my own experience of writing travel fiction. I write mostly travel fiction. I have written a few travelogues, but I haven't published them in any book, or apart from maybe posting them sometimes on my blog or things like that. But the actual stories are all fiction. They are inspired by travel, but except for the destination and setting, everything else is kind of made up by my mind. So these are 3 examples. The first one is a very interesting example. It's a very long story, but it's set up in Loktak Lake. So if any of you have been to Loktak Lake is in Manipur. Uh, it's near Imphal, uh, and it's I think the largest freshwater lake, at least in India. I think in Asia as well. It almost looks like the sea, or kind of at least the inland sea. Uh, it's huge, and it's just outside Imphal. The Loktak Lake obviously is very beautiful. There's no doubt about it. They uh, families actually live, a lot more families lived around Loktak Lake, but even today there's something called as the Fumdis, right? Yeah, Fumdis, which is basically growths of vegetation in the middle of the lake on which are floating, and families live around them. And Loktak Lake has a lot of history around it. So right from the Second World War, where there was a Battle of Imphal uh, that was fought there between the British and the Japanese forces, to later on, I mean, as recently as 15 years back, a lot of the insurgency kind of spreading into Loktak Lake. So this is what was the setting for this particular story. And this story is spread across around 60 years, right from a man who's a young child when the World War happened, to present day, where he is actually a grandfather. Uh, and I mean, the experiences, basically, uh, a simple man who wants to make a life along the Loktak Lake, what happens in his life across these 40 or 50 years. It's actually a short story, but a longish short story. So that's how it was inspired. So it was a visit to Loktak, but the family and the fishermen that we saw there, and the stories that our guide gave us when we were visiting Loktak, that is what inspired this particular piece of fiction. The second is again an interesting place, Majuli Island in Assam. So Majuli Island is on the Brahmaputra. It's, I think, the biggest district in India, in the sense that in terms of size, it's a very large island. Uh, but it's kind of covered by water. I mean, obviously it's an island, but it's kind of completely different from the rest of Assam. And there is a large Vaishnav culture there, the Satras. And again, coming back to, I think, a question asked around religious tourism. So the setting of Majuli Island has a combination of these Satras, which has a large, I think a Vaishnav saint went there some 70, 80 years back, and it's a very thriving community there, uh, which led to the skill of mask making. So there's a very typical Majuli skill where they make masks, and those masks are primarily used for, the plays and dramas that are adapted, or that are actually acted out by the villagers during various festivals. So there'll be a piece from the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, or maybe something else. And they use actually these masks, and these masks have now become one of the identities of Majuli. It's absolutely fascinating how they make it. And then there is the tribals who are actually majority of the island now. But they also live there, and they have their own stories around the Brahmaputra, the fishing, the rice beer making and things like that. So this story captures Majuli Island as the setting for the story, but this is not really a story about Majuli Island. I don't really go and tell you what happens in, what to see in Majuli Island and things like that. It's about two characters, a tribal woman and uh, and another priest from one of the satras, and the name of the story is The Mask, and there's a lot of things. I'll not get into the details of the story, but basically the story is about these two characters in the backdrop of Majuli Island, and then kind of what happens and all of the related aspects around that story. So this is an interesting, again, we were in Majuli Island for I think 2 days, and it just was absolutely breathtaking to experience this entire island on its own, which is very different from the rest of Assam. The third that I am, is about, there's a remote village in Kutch called Dhordo. Now it's fairly popular because of the festival of the Ran of Kutch that happens from December every year. But Kutch was not always a commercialized place, and there is a lot of innocence still there in the people of Kutch that we experienced when we were actually staying there, and the photograph there is actually of the village that we stayed there. And this story is based on the premise that how is it that the raw innocence of when it intermingles with commercial tourist interests, what ends up happening or what happens. That is the basic, and what are the questions that that village or a villager and his son might have faced. So that is the premise based on which this story was written. And yeah, I mean, again, it's about these two characters, and they are basically a bunch of camel rearers, and they basically milk the camels and sell their milk. That is their life, and what changes in their lives as things change around the Kutch. So that's what this story is about. So again, as I said, all of these three, the destination is the background, the characters and their definition is what I think I tried to focus on, and obviously you'll get a feel of the setting and the destination, but it's not really the critical thing. I mean, the real focus of the writer is on the characters within those destinations. So that's what I had. And so I think I'll stop here, and I think we'll open up for questions. Any closing comments from you, Hemant?
No, Ranjit, that was pretty insightful. Thank you for sharing. I think people would have some questions. So I think we'll just straight away go into that. What I could do is I will also maybe put a list of the books that you have written, and I'll put it up, unless you have that slide already with you, Ranjit. Do you have a slide that has picture of all your books?
I don't have it right away, but
Okay,
I think,
no worries, no worries.
yeah.
Okay, so questions here.
Ranjit, Jayashree here.
Hi, Jayashree.
Hi. So I wanted to ask you, how do you start writing this nonfiction when you go to a destination, you come back, you see things there. Do you start writing down immediately, or you note down the points and then you build up on that later?
So I typically note down what is it that that I kind of found interesting, either in terms of the place or an experience, or maybe a character, or some such anything. It can be even sometimes it's just a minor plot. A plot starts with a question, right? What would happen if? So it could be a combination of these things. It could be one or more of these. But I typically make a note of those. I do it on my phone most of the time.
Okay.
And then I come back, I kind of add it to my inventory of ideas.
Okay.
And the story actually gets written much later. It might be written 3 months, 6 months, sometimes even a year later. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And Ranjit, I mean, I also tried doing it like all, like, but there's a block. I mean, when I write the first draft, I'm so ashamed that, I kind of give it up, I'm not happy with that. And then I think, chhod do yaar, isko, we'll figure it out later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The first draft, you should just neglect it. First draft is typically something that uh, you keep away for a while and then come back to it after a week. You write something else for a week and then come back to it after a week. And then, as you said, the shame will go down and then you will make the corrections.
Yeah.
There's no other way, sorry. But
Yeah.
And then I got it right.
Yeah.
yeah.
But the first draft is important, right? You have to write
It
it.
is important in the sense that you kind of throw out everything that you have in your mind.
Hmm.
The story gets formed in the first draft, no question about it. I mean, what exactly you have in your mind without thinking of how well you're writing it, you basically write it out. But it's a gross error to think that it is ready and it's kind of ready for publication. So that's why I said just keep it away for a while. It's no surprise that you're ashamed of what you write in the first draft. But the first draft is most valuable because that's when what you felt after seeing something or after meeting someone actually comes up in a raw manner in the
Mm.
first draft. But you must realize that it is raw,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
that's why you come back and correct it.
Okay. And second question, Ranjit, is like, uh, like recounting a visit of mine is easy, right? Easy in the sense that I'm in control. I know that, I went to this place and I met and I can build a story. But, you build stories on that, right? So when I try to
Hmm.
write a story, I hit a wall because, I mean, so how do you imagine and put a story together? So like writing a travelogue and I did this and, this is what I met. These are the people I met. I can write it, right? But how do you put a story? Is that dependent on a person's imagination?
Yes, it is dependent on the person's imagination, but I think there is some amount of method to it. And what I can only say is the story typically starts with two things. One is the character or the main character or set of characters and the key conflict. So if you see someone there and you sense that, okay, there is one thing, there's the other thing, travelogue, as you said. But then I think what is important to, before you even start writing the story, is list out what is it that is interesting about that person. Is it that this person is happy or he's sad or he's angry or he's uh, something, I mean, some kind of conflict. He's looking for something that he didn't get.
Hmm.
Uh, so I think I typically start with the character and the conflict. And then when you start writing, it is basically your imagination taking over. But basically the starting point, there's a method to it. It's not foolproof.
Okay.
But so if you've gone to a particular place and you meet someone, then you start asking yourself, what is it that I found interesting about this person or this place? And why did I find it interesting? What was the conflict? Was he because he was angry that I found it amusing? Or was he because he was just anxious about something? Any kind of conflict that you have.
Thank you. Thank you. That was very insightful. Thank you.
Yeah, Ranjit, given the different genres that you have already covered in your writing, is there a plan to write any food-related travelogues?
Yeah, food related. I don't know. You've given me an idea. Not right now, at least I don't have any. Though obviously, food is a very big part of travel. And but I don't know whether there's a story. Maybe I'll have to Eat, Pray, Love has a lot of food in it. For example, the title includes eat, and I think Italy was the destination of eat, and India for pray, and Bali for love. So I have to think about it. But as of now, I don't have any plans on food travelogues. Yeah.
So
Thank you.
Gans Subramanian has one question. Can you talk about some interesting travel writing in local languages?
Local languages, I have read Marathi primarily, and P.L. Deshpande had a book which was his travelogue. I think it was called Apurvai. That I have read, but other languages in Hindi, and it was a splendid. It is a piece of, again, it's not commercial writing. It's a piece of travel inspired writing, where again it goes into the characters that the person met, and his experiences that he explains. It's in Marathi, so I've read that. But
I know that, right? I'm in reading.
sorry, what was it? Somebody said something? No. So that's what I can think of in Hindi. Nothing that strikes me right away.
Ranjit, you've written so many books, no? Which one do you like writing? Travel related or other fictional books? Which one do you enjoy writing?
I think I don't restrict myself only to travel writing. Travel writing happened at that time because there was a lot of ideas around it.
Road trip.
Yeah, there were a lot of ideas around it, and then because I've traveled, they kept coming. Uh, uh, I I I think, as I said again, if I find an interesting character, even if it is in a hospital, I think there's a book that I wrote about interesting characters in an apartment, 2 BHK for rent last year.
BHK for rent, yeah.
Yeah. So that has nothing to do with travel. It's mainly about interesting characters in apartments. I don't really want to only stick to, because the starting point, as I said, is always the character and the conflict. And if I find that person or that setting while I'm traveling, great. If not, then you might as well find it at home, or you might find it when you are when you're in an office or something like that. So
Okay.
So you said about three things which you look at. It's pretty good insights about, character, experience, and setting, right? Was the third one?
destination, yeah.
Destination or setting, you may say. When you write, what is your main focus out of these three? And then you start from.
My main focus is largely character. Uh, but if the character, like for example, Majuli, the character is a Vaishnav priest in one of the satras and a tribal woman in Majuli. So the destination is very important there. I mean, it is a setting, but I can't write a story like that uh, just imagining that they are in Bangalore, for example. It's very difficult to. So destination is a part of it, but the starting point is character. Similarly, the Loktak one that I spoke about, there the experience is very important, because unless that lake, the name of that story is Staying Afloat. It's a floating lake, right? You have all these fumdis that are floating all around, and it's a metaphor to that couple who's trying to stay afloat with all these things happening around them. So it's a character and a destination and their experience of staying afloat. So it's a mix always, but my starting point is generally the character.
Thank you.
So Ranjit, one quick question for non-fiction. Non-fiction is relatively easy, right? You merely recount your experience, in some linguistic form. But for fiction, you said that there has to be the character which needs to be built, right? A characterization has to be built. Does that need any special skill? And it sounds like very time consuming, because, and again, not disparaging anything, but purely from logistics point of view, it sounds as if you need to literally immerse yourself in that setting for a long period of time to sort of, understand the layers, the setting, the character, and all that. So, does one really kind of develop these skills over some time, or one because currently, honestly, I seem to be completely missing this lens at the moment. And how do I, sort of begin the journey of, at least seeing things, from a story point of view?
Mhm. So first and foremost, let me just say that there's nothing disparaging or anything. I mean, very good nonfiction also takes a lot of effort to write. Uh, and I don't think, I mean, one tends to think of fiction as more imaginative than nonfiction. That's not necessarily true. A good piece of nonfiction can be as exciting as or as great to read uh, as fiction. Having
Yes.
said that, to a certain extent, what you said is right, but not entirely. You don't need to stay at that place or immerse yourself in that place for a very long time. It's a lot of authors have perpetuated that idea that I go to a particular place and then I write about it or things like that. Typically, the homework is to be done after you thrash out your idea on paper, because when you're writing fiction, the problem is most likely not about the destination or the experience, but whether your story makes believable sense. Like for example, I can't, if if a character is a particular character, then it has got to be logical what he does next. That is where the challenge in story writing is, whether it is in one destination or the other. Whereas in non-fiction, the challenge is in really using words, connecting it to some motivation, and then bringing that experience alive for the reader. So both are challenging. I think it's a matter of practice beyond a point. And starting point is just the starting point, as I said. The character is just the starting point. Finally, you got to thrash it out into a story, and that happens with practice typically.
All right. Thank you.
So Ranjit, Priya has left a chat. Um, so okay, let me read that, right? And then you could answer her. Hi Ranjit, thank you for your insightful talk. I do think that in travel fiction, the place or locale can almost take on the role of a key character in itself. For example, The Hungry Tide by Amitav Ghosh brought alive the sheer presence and the perspective of Sundarbans and its local communities in the story. How do you place the locale and its context within the stories you write?
Yes, this is absolutely true, and some of the best travel fiction has uh, the locale itself as the main character. And the example from Amitav Ghosh's book, I mean, absolutely correct. And you can't write a story like that if the location is something else. And I think the key question on how do you place it in context, uh, that really depends on what the context is and what the story is about. That's where I think the connection between the character and the destination, I think it's obviously the skill of the writer, but then fundamentally it has to be a story which has to have the destination as a key character. If that is the case, then weaving it is relatively easy. If you do it artificially, then becomes one of the main characters. I agree with that, but that depends on the context uh, and the skill of the author. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Hey Ranjit, thank you for this very insightful, informative talk. I just want to ask, you touched on this earlier. How important is it? Uh, how soon should you start writing after a travel trip or something? The ideas, you may forget some details, and you mentioned about taking notes, but if all you have is like maybe pictures and some WhatsApp
Yes,
messages and things like that.
that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
And the
absolutely.
second question is,
Mm.
do you decide on the length, how many words or how many pages that you're planning to write beforehand, or is it just as you go along?
Okay. So thanks for the question, Brahma. The first one is relatively easy to answer in the sense that uh, the sooner the better. In the sense that you are right. I mean, when you go to a particular place and you want to write a story around a character that inspired you in that place, uh, you might actually forget some of the specifics of that place as time goes on. So I typically want to finish writing. If the idea is strong enough, then 6 months is what I wait the most. Sometimes some stories kind of stay with you, or some characters stay a bit longer. But if I have a laundry list of, let's say, 10 things that struck me in this particular trip, at least 50 to 60% of them have to get on paper, at least the first draft, within 6 months. You're right. I mean, it is very difficult to get into, and those specifics are important. Uh, those specifics are important uh, not for putting them into the story as much as making sure that something that is not realistically possible, you kind of put it on paper. So I would say 3 to 6 months is ideal. The second question on the length. The length is largely a factor of how big is the uh, inspiration of your story. How big in the sense, in terms of length, or in terms of I typically so if it's a single or two scenes, like the one that I was talking about with Rajesh, that he had read the guide, is basically a small visit to the Dew Fort, and it's the scenes. There are just 2 or 3 scenes in that particular story where uh, a traveler visits, and then the guide takes them through the fort, and then they leave. So, and there are things that happen in that particular period. So it's a relatively short stories, and I know from the start that it's very short. It's maybe 1,500 words, 2,000 words at the most. The Loktak one is relatively long because while it has only maybe 5 or 10 scenes, it is a story that starts from almost the childhood of the main character till that character is in his 60s or 70s. And there is a lot of things that happen in that particular period with that character, his wife, his son, and the society in general, the whatever happens around Loktak Lake. So that's a very long story. It's, I think, 8-10,000 words. So that I knew from the start that this is going to be a long story. So it is a factor of what is it that inspired you. If it's the family's life, it obviously was not just one scene, so it spread a bit longer. There was another story called The Monk Who Wasn't, which I had written after a trip to Arunachal Pradesh, about a Buddhist monk. That was actually about his entire life, and I actually at one point thought that this will become kind of like a novel, but I ran out of ideas beyond a point. So I kind of stopped it at around, but it still ended up around, I think, 10,000 words, because it starts from this boy who comes to Arunachal when his parents flee from Tibet, to his entire growing up years when he becomes a monk, and then he kind of comes back to his monastery under his guru. So it also spread over 25, 30 years. I thought it would be a novel, but it didn't. I didn't. So it again was around 8-10,000 words. So it really depends on the spread of how long your idea is and how big your idea is.
And maybe what medium you're writing for. You think online medium
Yes.
has a different
Yeah, online medium, typically shorter writing is what I think. I mean, most of my writing is short stories, but because of the overall, in one sitting or 2 sittings, if you can finish it, then typically 2 scenes or 3 scenes is what works best. or sometimes even just one scene. Yeah.
So what's the next book, Ranjit?
So that's a question that I don't know the answer for yet, but hopefully whenever it's ready, then I'll let you know. Yeah.
Okay.
But there's something, some ideas in the works, so let's see if it happens this year or next year.
Okay.
So Ravi has a question. For the travel-based fictional stories, how do you draw the end?
The end is primarily driven uh, by the closure to the conflict that it started. So there has to be a way by which either something happens because of which the main character, whatever conflict he was fighting, is over. Basically, there is either over or he learns to live with it, or some such closure. Basically, so the end is drawn typically when one of these things happen. It could be it's generally the journey of the character, as I said, in as part of the journey. And when he reaches the end of that journey, it's also the end of his or the character's journey. So typically that is what brings the fictional story to the end, and that's exactly the reason the monk who wasn't, that I said, it actually ended because the characters conflict ended, and I didn't have anything else to write beyond that. So basically, the faster the conflict closes, that's when the reader feels that the story is over, and the writer has kind of to follow the character and close the story. Yeah.
So you're heading to Nepal for the Annapurna base camp trek. Do you see a book on that?
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Yeah, perhaps. Uh, Trekking and traveling are kind of related, so let's see. Yeah.
But like a lot of your books have been inspired on books or stories have been inspired on your travels, right? So these days, when you travel, you are always on the lookout as well, is it?
Yes, I am. And there's nothing to worry. If you are traveling with me, you may end up in one of the stories, but I'll make sure that that's the author's responsibility. I don't want to put things which you won't like to read, so don't worry about it. But yes, I'm on the lookout for ideas.
Right.
It definitely is part of my travel plan. Yeah.
Right. I think that's goes for every author, I guess. So they look for characters in people and largely characters, right? Okay, ये
Yes.
बड़ा interesting character है, इस पे कुछ बन सकता है, right? Things like that.
Yeah,
So
it starts from there typically,
yeah,
character, and you meet more of those when you're traveling,
right.
more
Absolutely.
out of your typical surroundings. Yeah.
Right. Right. So Parikshit is in this call as well, who's going to be a roommate in Annapurna base camp. So
Oh, is he? Okay.
yeah,
Hi,
so I'm sure.
Parikshit.
Hi, Rajit.
So Parikshit, beware.
Yeah.
Ravi's asking, when are you heading? 7th you're leaving, right? 7th April?
8th.
8th April.
Yeah.
8th to
Thanks.
19th.
Thanks, Ramana. I saw your message. Yeah.
Yeah, I passed by Annapurna Base Camp on the way to Muktinath last year. So hopefully I can go to Annapurna Base Camp someday.
Okay, wonderful.
Shishir has a question. I have a basic question. How to tackle with language barriers related to characters? That's a good question, actually.
Language barriers, as in if the character is, let's say, based in a location where they don't speak the language. I mean, their natural language is something else. Then how do I deal with it? That's what you mean?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So I'll write in English. So I try to capture that barrier. It's not entirely capturable, honestly speaking.
Yeah.
Unfortunately or fortunately, if I'm writing about, let's say, a character in the Kutch, if it is written in that language, Gujarati, for example, or the Kutchi, it might be
Okay.
more effective. Or if it's written in Manipuri, let's say, on the Loktak piece, it might be more effective because
Yeah.
it captures the local scenario better. But because I write primarily in English, I try to capture that essence, but it's
Yeah.
largely for an English reading audience. So it's not completely solved always, but hopefully I can get you some part of that essence of that experience and character through the stories that I write.
Yeah. The question came from recently. We had a visit to New Zealand, and we met those local tribal group, Maori,
Maori.
and Maori, and they were discussing about their traditions, their living, and how they earn and how they get trained to their next generation and all that. But very few words we were able to understand. But because of their expressions, I could jot down something, and I taken some videographs of that. And actually, I want to make a short video film on that with
Yeah.
background story in their language and all that.
Oh,
So
okay.
that is my topic. So that's why I joined this
Excellent.
lecture.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you can capture or kind of get a story in the local language, absolutely nothing like it, but not always possible.
Yes.
So, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
the next best alternative is to do it in the language that you're comfortable with, I guess. Yeah,
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, sir. Thanks a lot. Great.
no problem.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Mona has a question. My work provides me with many stories I want to document. How do I start writing?
Oh, that's wonderful. So, I think the easiest way to start writing is to start writing in the sense that put it in a paragraph first, then the paragraph will become two paragraphs. I think the writing experiences from your work where you're closest to, uh, I think it's something which you should just put a. I think one of the uh, problems that people face at the start is not having some kind of a schedule around writing, and maybe putting some schedule around writing, even if it's 15 minutes a day for something like what you mentioned, uh, experiences at office. You'll find in no time that you get used to it, and then a story comes out, or even if it's just an experience around, maybe a blog post will come out, or a column or an article. But at least that's better than having nothing on paper. So the best thing I can say is keep track of what experiences move you or kind of are the ones that you want to document, and then kind of create a schedule around, maybe even if it's 3 days a week or maybe over the weekends. You do it over a period of time, you'll find that it's there. Yeah.
Ravi has written, good luck. I'm going for the highest peak in Europe, Mount Elbrus. I do have some wonderful memories from my travels. Always felt like capturing those memories in words. However, it is the starting trouble for me.
Again, the same answer, I guess. starting trouble, just put on the ignition plug and start. Uh, I don't think there's any other answer than that, because you have the memories and you have uh, things that inspired you or moved you or something that memorable in those. It's a matter of getting the time and putting it into words. And it may be, I think one of the things that a lot of people are worried about is it may not come out well. You don't have to publish it tomorrow. So it's okay, even if it does not come out well, as long as it comes out, it's okay. Yeah.
Ranjit, Ravi here.
Ravi.
Suddenly, buddy, like you have been an inspiration for our batch and for our kids. Definitely need to draw some inspiration from you to put those memoirs in words.
Great. If anything that I can help, I'll be happy to.
Sounds great. Like we'll have to catch up with you one day.
Sure.
Any other questions, anyone? Great. I think we exceeded our time, but that's always good when a good interaction or session is happening. So thank you all for coming. Thank you so much, Ranjit. It was indeed a very insightful session. I think it will inspire a lot of people to, start writing. And
Thanks for
yes,
having me.
yeah. So yeah, thank you, everyone. And as I have already shared in the chat, so we do these calls. A couple of weeks ago, we had a session on travel photography, for example. So travel related talks, which we keep on doing every other Sunday or so. So please do join our WhatsApp communities or the Google form. Please fill in that in case you want to know about what the upcoming talks and calls are. And of course, visit ranjitkulkarni.com, right? For those who don't know him, that's where all his books are there, and all of them are available in amazon.com. So you may want to go and order one or two of them. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks for your time
Thank
and
you.
patience. And
Thank
good luck.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Ranjit. Bye.
Bye.